Hello everyone, I'm Ellie Shore, and this is the Mixed and Multimedia Salon, and welcome to everybody. We have 2 salons a month. We've been going for a year and a half now. The Mixed and Multimedia Salon meets on the first Tuesday night of the month. I invite a wide variety of professional artists to come in and share their work with us, and I'm looking for people who are doing innovative and experimental things and using media and materials in all kinds of innovative ways. One of the wonderful people that I found is Alex Trimino. Alex has had a number of she has an MFA from Florida International University in Miami, and she's had a number of artist residencies. One was at the Deering Estate, and I've also seen her work at the Hollywood Art and Culture Center. And she's had a number of residencies in different places, which she'll be telling you about. And this is Alex Trimino.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I was trying to debate what to show tonight. And I thought a really good way to do this is if I show you how my work got to where it is right now. So this image represents more or less where my work is right now. It's not the latest, but this is what I've been doing for a while, and it's illuminated fiber-based sculpture. So I'm going to take you from maybe like 3 years ago and show you how I started doing this and everything that I went through to get to this, and how this work has evolved too. So I started doing my MFA, and I was a painter. My BFA was in painting, and everything I did was painting. So to apply for my MFA, I had to apply as a painter. But I didn't want to paint anymore. So I applied as a painter, and as soon as I was accepted, I told them that I didn't want to paint anymore. So these are the first pieces when I was doing my MFA, and I was working on these fiber-based pieces. And what I used to do is I used to break electronics, so night lights that had sensors, small speakers, LED lights, and I would create this. They were still a little bit like paintings because they were very much two-dimensional. Like in this piece, there were little sensors that when the viewer would stand in front, it would click on the sensor because of the presence, the motion sensor, and the speaker would go on. Then there was a little light that would go on. They were a little bit too personal, but still, I was still sticking to that two-dimensional work. These are details of it. So I think they were still a little bit like a painting. This was the second piece I did when I was doing the MFA. I created these 2 chairs that had a conversation with each other. And it was my great-grandmother's chairs, and I completely changed them, added things. And I used this that is called the LilyPad Arduino. And the LilyPad Arduino is a microcontroller. It connects to the computer, and you program everything. So every little pin you see on that flower-like thing, you can control something different. So I was controlling a conversation between the 2 chairs. So one chair would talk, the other one would respond. But you can't really pick on the conversation. It was more or less like a murmur conversations that happened in these chairs over the years. And I was very interested in like this idea of this dead material, but everything that has happened around these chairs. Okay, that's more of a detail on it. And then I did this piece, and this was a loom I created. It was about 13 feet tall. I know I couldn't stand it in the studio, so it was pretty tall. And it was just cotton material, a loom. I did the loom on wood. Then I installed it with pressure from the bottom and the top, so everything could be removed, and you couldn't really see that it was a loom. And I had these shavings of wood, and then the projection was me planing wood. And I wanted to make sure that you could see that it was a woman. I mean, it wasn't about me planing the wood, but just a woman doing it. And I thought about, like, how can I make sure that everybody knows it's a woman? So I decided to do it without wearing anything. So there was a video playing, and there I'm planing the wood. And the wood that you see down there is just the mountain of wood that is like accumulating from me planing the wood. And I think at this point, and even before, I started realizing I was working with this idea of gender-related work. Because you tend to relate, like somebody planing wood, a carpenter, you think about men, right? Something that you relate more to men. And same thing with electronics, you tend to relate that more to men, while crocheting or embroidery and fibers usually related to women. And this is a piece I did for summer show at David Castillo Gallery in Miami. And this piece is actually at the Girls Club, so it's part of the collection. And the piece moves, and you see part of it is the shadow of the piece, but the other part is a projection of the piece moving at a slower speed. And I started working in this project with my friends in Colombia. I'm from Colombia. And we decided to do this work with women that were victims of domestic violence and to teach them how to crochet, not as art therapy, but as a way to get them away from their partners. So they would learn how to crochet, and we would put them together with a company that would buy their work. The only thing they had to do in return was to do the same for another woman that was in the same condition. So every circle was bought from a different woman who was a victim of domestic violence. So the whole idea of the shadow and the projection moving at a different speed, it was, in my head, it was about that. Like, we're all moving at a different speed, but we all get there. And I'm showing this piece because that's when the work started moving towards what I'm doing right now. And I started working with the lights and mixing all these different parts and found objects. So this was like a fishing rod, and it had the basket in the bottom, it had the lights on the top. So I was very happy with this piece, but I was still very much exploring. And you will see this come up again, because I do recycle a lot of parts in my work. So then I did this piece. This was at Hollywood. It was there, and they liked it, but I hated it. I thought it was so static and frigid and horrible. But I still show it because I think it was so important for my work. It helped me get to where I am right now. And it was about this idea I had in my head of working with these elongated tubes, but it wasn't working really. That's a detail. And then I had a chance to do this piece for Arte Americas in Miami Beach. I was still working on my MFA. And I thought about this Afghan. All throughout my work, I've been very interested in the fibers. But I always thought there's something more about these fibers that I'm really not understanding. There's something that I'm really missing. So this became like a way to do a little bit more of research into that textile, how that knitting, how that crocheting is done. So what you see here on the left is a cast I created from a real Afghan. I took an Afghan and I created this wood box, put the Afghan down, cover it completely in Vaseline, and then I poured plaster over it, and I created a cast of the Afghan. So that's the cast. And then from the cast, I created a silicone Afghan. Then I scanned the Afghan and I enlarged it, I don't know, about like 1,000 times to create the wallpaper in the back. And this is the silicone Afghan.
Wow, that's so cool.
Here you see the silicone. And on the cast, I had a projection of the real Afghan. But the projection kept changing and altering the... And this is a detail of the cast. And actually, the cast took the pigment, so I never painted the cast. This is the way it came out. It took the pigment from the Afghan. But I was actually able to save the Afghan.
Even with the Vaseline over it?
Yes, even with the Vaseline. It took the pigment. It was natural pigment, which I didn't know, so it was a bit of a surprise. And I was able to save the Afghan. So the only thing that was missing from this was the real Afghan. And I think the the whole thing, and that took a while. It was about me understanding that space the Afghan was occupying, how the stitch was done, how all these spaces. And I kept thinking there's something about all this knitting and crocheting that I'm really not understanding. And then I did this show. It was also during our MFA. I used the silicone Afghans, and I just put a light behind. And I thought, well, maybe if I add color, you can really see more of the difference between the parts that are very thin and the parts that are very thick. And this is when I started working with the light. And these are the first 3 pieces I did, and it was just fluorescent tubes covered in plastic. They were all hanging, and I just did these 3, and I was like, okay, I felt so good. I was like, okay, now I know what I need to do. In a way, I felt like I was really bringing all this crocheting and knitting to light. And I was still like doing some research on the crocheting and knitting. Our details. And I use a lot of found objects on them. So I started finding all this about the relationship between, and I think that's when the work really came together. I started finding about the relationship between the microcontrollers that I was using and the crocheting. And for a microcontroller, to program a microcontroller, the basics is algorithms. And for algorithms, the basic form of an algorithm is hyperbolic geometry. And hyperbolic geometry is something that comes very natural to crocheting. And I thought that was so interesting. I'm like, here I am, and I did reject crocheting for a long time when I was growing up because I didn't want to have anything to do with anything domestic. Not cooking or crocheting or anything that would tie me to a domestic life. But then my work brought me to this, and I thought it's how interesting to think that all these women that were crocheting and knitting were actually understanding hyperbolic geometry at a very intuitive level. Before this, I thought I was really contrasting, oh, here is technology, and here is like the old traditions I come from. That's what I thought. I'm really contrasting the two. And the more research I did on it, the more I saw that everything was at the same level, exactly at the same level. I wasn't really contrasting the two. I was just showing that everything was at the same level. And I did this chart because when I was growing up, I was very interested in math. So that came a little bit natural to me. But I thought it would be good to, because it sounds like very fancy hyperbolic geometry, but it's not that fancy. It's pretty simple. So if you imagine a plane, and then if you imagine a line on that plane, and just imagine that that line is curved, and then instead of a plane, you imagine a circle instead of a square, right? And then imagine that you have more lines, and just imagine that you can pick up these lines. And these lines create planes, and all these planes are hyperbolic planes that you're creating. And that's what we do in crocheting. Every time that we increase, decrease, it's hyperbolic geometry. And this is something that's done by Dania, I can't remember her last name, but she works for MIT. And she creates these things because the only way, if you want to create hyperbolic planes to teach students what a hyperbolic plane is, you can't do it in paper. It's completely impossible to do it in paper. It's completely impossible to do it in any other material than crocheting. That's the material that it comes natural to. So I thought that was very interesting. So then the work, I think, started coming together. I did this installation at a project room at the Florida Museum for Women Artists in the land. And it was really nice because I had this whole room to work with. So these are some details from it. I still was working mostly with fluorescent. And then I realized like whenever I need to turn, I can't do it with fluorescent tubes because they're always straight. I was just adding the color to the fluorescent tubes. And doing this whole room, this installation, brought me to neon. And I started working with neon, and I found this wonderful place in Miami that they've been very nice to me, and they actually taught me how to do some things. And so whenever you see them straight, I'm using fluorescent, and whenever you see me turning, I'm using neon. So here I use again the circles that were made by the women who were big. So every circle is made by a different woman. So I brought them again into the work, and you see again, this is a small piece I did for, I think, Locust. Then this is when we were finalizing our MFA, and that was at FIU, and I don't know if any of you have been to the Frost Museum at FIU. They have this thing on the roof so you can't hang anything, and then they have the wood floor so you can't attach anything to the floor. So it was a challenge because all of my pieces were hanging before this, and I thought, what am I going to do if all my pieces are hanging and I can't attach to the floor and I can't hang from the ceiling? But in a way, it was really good because it brought me to making my pieces self-standing. So what I did, I started creating, instead of using just plastic tubes, I started using plexiglass that is more sturdy. And I created a series of self-standing pieces. And from the self-standing pieces, I created an aluminum structure that would fit into them. And the aluminum piece was imitating the movement of the wires. And then from that aluminum piece, the other pieces would hang. So I think thanks to that challenge, my work moved into self-standing pieces. I still do hanging and self-standing. So this is from the show at Hollywood Cultural Arts Center last year. And I was doing my residency at Deering. And so I think I took a little bit more of that working in nature and taking parts from nature. So I was taking some tree trunks and things that I shouldn't take it, but there they are. So it's really a mix of fluorescent, neon, found objects, and all this crocheting and knitting. This was a year ago. Okay, then I did this residency at Oxbow. Oxbow is in Michigan, but it's associated with the Chicago Art Institute. And it was really great to just step away from everything. And it was when my residency at Deering was ending. No, I was still doing my residency here. It wasn't ending. It was in the middle of my residency that I did this other residency. But it was really great. And then I had this solo show at Oxbow, and they had these options of doing it at a very wide cube kind of space, or this all gallery. So I picked the all gallery, and I was able to get some pieces coming out of the window and work more with the neon and found objects. And here you see the ceiling of the gallery. So that's a detail from that piece. So here you see the ceiling. It was really like a rundown all gallery. But I thought it was great to work with the colors of the space. Then I finished my residency at Deering, and Peter told me about a symposium that was happening in Sweden. So I applied to that, and I was very lucky I got in. So they invited me to ship my materials and work there for a month and produce work. So this is at the Lance Museum in Sweden. It's actually something very nice they do over there. They do this symposium, and they have it's about installation work, only installation work. And it's 70 artists from all around the world that come and turn the city into this installation park. And they pick, I mean, it's totally of 70, but they pick 15 artists that will create the work there. So I was very lucky to be one of the 15, and then we were all living in this house together for a month. They were super sweet, super nice to us. So we didn't have to worry about anything but just doing our work. So we had this, we were all living in this house that was actually an old bus station. And the garage where the buses would go, that was our studios. So we all created our work there, and then they had all these people transporting the work to where the work was supposed to be installed. It was fantastic, and I met artists from all over the world. Everybody installed in different places. My work was at the Lands Museum. Yeah. That was the installation I created there. Again, the same thing of the mixing of the neon. The work changes a little bit according to the space I'm showing in. This detail from the same show. That was, it's like one of my favorite pieces, because what it is leftover material from different projects. So you know how you just keep this little bit from, like, this piece is left from this and this piece, and then you end up having this like mess. But it's so beautiful, you really don't want to throw it away. So that was like this mess from years of projects, and I thought it was so beautiful just to put it on that piece. So I think every material that I use means something in some way. I used to use more materials that were given to me by my family, but they don't give me that much now because I cut everything up. After my residency, I got a call from Diana Lowenstein, so I'm now represented by Diana. And I'm doing a piece for Pulse. She's having a piece in Pulse, and then I'm doing another piece for a fair she's doing in Bologna, and then another piece for a fair she's doing in London, and then another piece for a fair she's doing in Brussels. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, and the show that I have in Sweden right now, it's moving to Berlin. So, and that's more or less where my work is now. But I have all these things in my head. Oh, next time I'm going to do this, and so, I don't know. We'll see.
We didn't see any of your painting.
No.
If we had seen your painting, would we have seen the connection?
I think so, yes, yeah. I actually started first adding embroidery to the paintings. And then I was interested in this type of mushroom that grows a crochet type of skirt overnight. And they find it in Hawaii, and they say that the smell of this mushroom can make women come, but men find it disgusting. So I did a series of that mushroom.
I see a lot of abstract expressionistic flowing of colors and lines. Was that in your paintings?
Yeah, I think so. I think I see my installations more as three-dimensional drawings. And when I'm doing an installation, I try to create this in my head, or try to do a little maquette of all these like lines moving through the space. So they're really more like drawings than sculptures.
You're constantly experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been part of your life?
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that I do find very interesting of working in installation versus working in painting. I think working in painting was this very lonely life with the canvas. And then working in installation is like you need to do all this research, and then you need to go to this place and find out how do they do this, and go to a different place, a different factory, find out how you can get this done. So there's so much more involved in the work than just the lonely work in the studio. And you get so many more people involved that it becomes a collaboration. And I really love that. Thank you.